It was Auschwitz, the Nazi death camp where more than 1 million people, mainly Jews, were murdered. People with families and friends, ordinary people robbed of their future. Each had their own unique story of how they came to be at Auschwitz, but only a small minority survived. Transportation. People were taken in and out of camps by trains. Thousands of people were packed into one car. Many people died on their way to their camps, and only a few made it out of their camps. Arrival. When the door of the train opened, there was a lot of noise. People were scared of the dogs barking and the big women with the whips. They were told to leave their luggage, and they would get it back later. Then they were separated from their families. Children and their moms went with the elderly straight to the gas chambers. Men and older boys that could work were separated from the women, while the women and the older girls were taken to the women part of the camp. Sauna. Once they got into the camp, they were taken to a sauna. At the sauna, they got new clothing and their new haircut. They would get their new clothes and their wooden clogs. Tattooing. Tattooing was the way they knew which prisoner was which. They had a number engraved in their arm. When that number was on their arm, they became that number and not what their parents had named them.
First of all, survival depended on a place of work. If you were working outside, and the commandos, which are work parties, you hadn't had a prayer to survive for long. The other thing you couldn't survive was without a pair of shoes. Well, the problem was that you were issued wooden clogs. Your clogs would get stuck in the mud, your feet would rub, they would get infected, and you were dead. If you didn't have your bowl, you were dead, because nobody would give you their bowl. So survival depended on if you could not think about anything, just have a tunnel vision and think like an animal. Just picture yourself, what does an animal do? What does an animal need? Well, it doesn't need very much just to live, but the first thing it needs to get away from the predators, get away from all these people that are trying to kill you.
Housing. If you were lucky, you would get a straw mattress. You had no way to keep warm. You shared a bunk with 8 other prisoners, and you snuggled together to keep from being super duper cold. The wooden huts where prisoners slept were originally built for 52 horses, but the Nazis kept up to 1,000 people crammed in on top of one another. Selection or roll call. If you were no longer useful to the Nazis, you would be selected and sent into the gas chambers. After roll call, people would go around collecting all the dead corpses. Jobs. Some jobs were digging ditches, the lavatory block where you would dig out human waste with your bare hands all day. You could build barracks, or if you were lucky enough, you'd go to the Canada block where you would sort through the documents and valuables that the Nazis had taken from the people at arrival. Block 25. Block 25 was a place where the women Jews that were selected stayed until enough Jews got there, so it would be more convenient for the Nazis to start the gas chamber because they ran these camps as efficiently and as conveniently as possible. The liberation of Auschwitz. In mid-January 1945, as Soviet forces approached the Auschwitz camp complex, the SS began evacuating Auschwitz and its satellite camps. Nearly 60,000 prisoners were forced to march west from the Auschwitz camp system. Thousands had been killed in the camps in the days before these death marches began. Tens of thousands of prisoners, mostly Jews, were forced to march to the city of Wodzislaw in the western part of Upper Silesia. SS guards shot anyone who fell behind or could not continue. Prisoners also suffered from cold weather, starvation, and exposure on these marches. More than 15,000 died during the death marches from Auschwitz. On January 27, 1945, the Soviet army entered Auschwitz and liberated more than 7,000 remaining prisoners, who were mostly ill and dying. All in all, it is estimated that at least 1.3 million people were deported to Auschwitz between 1940 and 1945. Of these, at least 1.1 million were murdered. After watching a documentary about Auschwitz, I learned a lot, and I hope you guys learned something from my presentation.